Tikela, welcome to my YouTube channel. So today let's talk about how Umnesi and Mncube decided, you know what? Wednesday, that was the day we are finalizing the evidence in chief. And yeah, they are done. We are there by the stages of cross-examination now. But let's start with Mncube and Mnisi and let's look at everything that they touch on before we move on to the others. So Mncube and Mnisi wrap up the evidence in chief. The microphone has been handed over and the battlefield has changed because right now, Sanalam, things are getting messier. Advocate Mnisi has now wrapped up her leading Prince Mncube through his evidence in chief, and make no mistake, this was never just about allowing Mncube to tell his story. Mnisi was building a defense architecture, brick by brick, question by question, and now the state has to walk into that structure and try to demolish it. Because the central question surrounding accused number 3 is brutally simple. Can the state actually prove that Mncube was one of the men inside the house, and more importantly, that he was the man who pulled the trigger? That is where this gets nuclear. Now, let's start with the first bomb that they dealt with, identity. Let's start with the elephant in the room, Kesana, because identification. The state has relied on descriptions of the alleged intruders: dreadlocks, physical appearance, clothing, the alleged gold tooth, and then those descriptions are connected to Mncube somehow, according to the state. But here is when Mnisi's strategy became dangerous for the state, because there is a massive difference between the person had dreadlocks and therefore that person was Mncube. When the dreadlock situation became, Mncube's dreadlocks were long. They were very long, and the description that was given by the people inside the house, the dreadlocks were up to here. That is becoming very problematic because there are pictures that are saying Mncube had long dreadlocks that day. Okay, we will get there when it comes to the situation of pictures. Those are not the same propositions, Kesana, and the defense wants the court to confront that gap because it's a huge one. It's a huge one, né? And it needs to be dealt with. Because if the identification isn't reliable, then everything built on top of that identification becomes vulnerable. That was step number 1 in their bombs, because they were throwing grenades, bombs. Iraq, where is this? Those fighting places, Russia and Putin, yes. Bomb number 2, the dreadlocks issue. Now, let's get into that. The dreadlocks issue may sound superficial. It is not. It is not. Imagine you are confronted by armed intruders during a terrifying incident. You are under pressure. You are trying to survive. Later, you describe what you remember. You say, he had dreadlocks, short dreadlocks. Now, fast forward, police have an accused person who had dreadlocks that day. Does that automatically transform a general description into a positive identification? Never, especially when there is distinction, a very huge one, regarding the dreadlocks. Nope, it can't. Now, that's the whole Mnisi is trying to expose, because the defense doesn't necessarily need to prove that the witness lied. It can argue something much more powerful. They may genuinely have believed what they remembered and still have made a mistake. But now they did not make the mistakes. Everyone was in the house. They said the person had short dreadlocks, and the person that was arrested had long dreadlocks that were plaited. It's not the same thing, okay? And that is precisely why identification evidence is so dangerous, okay? Now, Judge Rota needs to deal with that. Bomb number 3, the gold tooth situation. Oh, then we arrive at another supposedly powerful identifier, the gold tooth. The state wants the court to look at Mncube and say, there it is. Look at those pictures. There it is. Look at those pictures. But the defense question is more precise. Did Mncube have, or did Mncube actually have that feature on the 26th of October 2014? Not today, not years later, on the night Senzo Meyiwa was killed, because if the gold tooth is being used as an identification marker, the chronology matters. And suddenly, what looked like a simple physical characteristics became a forensic timeline problem. When did he have it? Was it permanent? Was it removable? Was it actually visible? Was the witness describing the same person? And most importantly, does it identify Mncube beyond reasonable doubt? Now, what was interesting when it comes to this bomb was that Mncube says, in my life, I never had a gold tooth. Don't you dare. It's a lie. I never had a bloody gold tooth. Me, as Umthobisi Prince wakamncube, lo wasemancubeni akaze abe nayo igolide. And then there was a witness, uMakimbi Buthelezi, said, I don't know him with a gold tooth. And then it turns out the picture that was previously said to be Mncube, it's his late brother, whom he comes after, who had a gold tooth. It's not him. And this brother is darker than him. And then it turns out the picture that they keep lying and saying now it's Mncube's picture that had a gold tooth. There is an original one that does not have a gold tooth. So it's a lie. Yebo, it's a lie in yakhona. And then Mncube also went to a doctor and said, you know what, bangibhedela la, can you guys check? And the report comes back and says there was never a gold tooth. Bomb number 4, the photographs. Now we get to the photographs. This is where Nisi's questioning became particularly important, because photographs don't just show faces. They can establish appearances, clothing, location, time, context, and potential movement. Before we move further, let's start about the appearance. The pictures were shown. Mncube is wearing everything khaki, jacket up to the jeans. Everything was khaki with black sneakers. And if he was inside, but weirdly, the people inside the house, they don't say anything about the shoes that were worn by these so-called intruders. Okay, nonetheless, now they are not saying the intruder was wearing khaki. They're saying a khaki abanye, they say khaki caramel jacket, abanye brownish jacket. It's a lot. It's a mess. But now, he was wearing all khaki. All khaki. He was wearing all khaki. What do you mean you did not notice that? That was his appearance. First thing that should have been noticed. The second, one of the other things that they did not mention, he had an earring, and it's very visible when you see those pictures. It's very, very visible. So it's weird that they could not notice that. It's very weird. And then the clothing, we talked about it, that he was wearing khaki. And there is someone who said the jacket had a woolen collar. And the jacket that we see there does not even have a woolen tone. It's just jean to jean. Khaki, jean to jean. Location. The pictures are showing Lesedi, are showing George Gore at the time of the incident. He was, yes, in Phosphorus, but at Mazibuko Hostel Lesedi, not Kabokeli Kumalo or Basutu Hostel. So it's a lie. It's been digitally proven. Go Google. And then the context yakona, the state context is not making sense, because by the afternoon, as it was ending, we can see the Uguti. You can see Uguti Ugai was moving away from Phosphorus, moving to Kotlehong. What's this? Helderberg Road, N3. Helderberg Road going back to Johannesburg. Sana kuningi kunjalo. And then now the movement is very clear ukuthi uGuy ebeyishiya iFoslora, uyishila iFoslora ske afternoon. And ngabo 5 he is there in George Gore. That's when they were taking pictures nabo accused number 5 again. Okay. But if only if the court knows what those photographs actually establish, and that's where the defense has repeatedly challenged the state's interpretation, because there is a massive difference between this photograph exists and this photographs proves our theory. The second proposition requires evidence, and the evidence is in support of Mncube. Bomb number 5, the location. And then comes the location problem. Where exactly was the photograph taken? When? Who took it? Who was present? And what independent evidence confirms that? This becomes particularly important when witnesses disagree about locations. Because if the state wants to use a photograph to place Mncube somewhere, it needs to establish the location with confidence. Otherwise, the photographs becomes an image without a proven evidential destination, and that's a problem. Now, the other issue when it comes to this photograph, the state wants to use these photographs to nail Mncube, as in like that day he was wearing these things, he had dreadlocks in. But the same pictures, when they need to be used for Mncube, the state now suddenly doesn't want the pictures to be used. They don't want anything to do with that phone to be used to save Mncube. Isn't that ironic? Isn't that ironic? Bomb number 6, clothing. Don't underestimate the clothing evidence. A lime-colored t-shirt. Umzungu, the liar, said Mncube was wearing a lime-colored t-shirt, a jacket, different photographs, different descriptions, different moments. These details can become chronological anchors. The defense can essentially ask, are we looking at one continuous timeline, or are different events being stitched together? Because if the state's timeline begins to wobble, the entire narrative becomes harder to sustain. Now, it turned out the lime t-shirt situation, it's a picture of not even Mncube, but of late Maskandi artist Umgqumeni. That's what it turned out to be, Kesan. Bomb number 7, the firearm issue. Now, let's talk about the gun. This is one of the biggest traps for the state. Suppose a firearm is found in Mncube's possession months after the murder. That may be incriminating in another context. But the murder charge requires something much more specific. Where is the connection between that firearm and the firearm that killed Senzo? That's the breach. And if the breach is in there, the defense can attack the inference, because possessing a firearm does not automatically equal possessing the murder weapon. And possessing a firearm in 2015 does not automatically prove possession of the murder weapon in October 2014. The state has to connect the dots, and they are failing. They are failing, Kesana, when it comes to this. The firearm issue, it failed this man, it's dead. Now, bomb number 8, the killing machine situation. And then there is the material allegedly found on the cell phone, photographs of firearm, ammunition, and the infamous phrase, my killing machine. Now, that's obviously damaging material. But again, the legal question is not, does this look bad? The question is, what does it prove? Does it prove Mncube owned the firearm? Does it prove he possessed the murder weapon? Does it prove he was at Foslora's house? Does it prove he participated in the Senzo Meyiwa murder? Or does it simply create a suspicion because criminal trials aren't decided on this looks suspicious? They are decided on whether the evidence establishes guilt beyond reasonable doubt. And Umangena, what you know, that's not the firearm. Okay. Then bomb number 9, the cell phone. Then we move on to the cell phone evidence. This is where the state wants connectivity by fear, by force. Who communicated with whom, when, how frequently? And what does that communication mean? Because communication between two people doesn't automatically equal criminal conspiracy. Knowing someone does not automatically mean or equal murdering with them. A phone call isn't automatically a murder plan. The state has to establish the meaning and context of that communication. And this is where the defense can attack the leap from association, conspiracy, participation, murder. These are 4 different steps. Now, when it comes to the cell phone issue, there was something that was said about linkage between Kelly Khumalo and Mncube and the call. Then it ended nowhere because it was established that there was no such call between Mncube and Kelly. Like, guys, it's a movie in the Bayale case. It's a movie, I'm telling you. Lastly, bomb number 10, the other IQs. And now the question becomes, what exactly is the connection between Mncube and the other IQs? If the state's theory is that these men acted together, then the courts need to understand the alleged relationship. Who recruited them? They said it's Nduli for Kelly. Weirdly, this same tool, okay, let's do a different video for that. Who communicated? Who met whom? When did the alleged conspiracy begin? Where did it happen? What evidence establishes coordination? Because if the state cannot establish that connectivity, sort of that connective issue, its risk presenting the court with separate pieces of evidence and asking the judge to assemble them into a conspiracy. And that is where reasonable doubt is born. But here is the real situation in Nuclear Point now. Mnisi's evidence in chief isn't supposed to prove Ncube innocent. That is not the legal burden. The defense doesn't have to solve the murder. It doesn't have to identify the real killer. It doesn't have to prove every state witness wrong. The question is whether the state has proved Ncube's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. And that's why the defense strategy is so important. Mnisi is effectively saying, don't look at one piece of evidence. Look at the whole chain. Look at identification, photographs, chronology, clothing, the so-called alleged gold tooth, the firearm, cell phone relationships, alleged movement, and then ask, does all of this necessarily lead to Ncube or does it merely create suspicion? What's going on? And the other issue is the issue, okay, that's the second one I must do a separate video for. And now the real show begins because Mnisi has finished building. Now the state gets the hammer, cross-examination. But for now, we are still busy with the defense lawyers doing cross-examination. And this is, when it comes to the state's cross-examination, this is where things could become exclusive. The state is going to take Ncube's answers and compare them against photographs, cell phone records, witness testimony, police evidence, documents, dates, locations, and every inconsistency becomes a potential pressure point because here is the danger of giving evidence. You don't just tell your story, you give the opposition a roadmap showing them exactly where to attack. Now, the question should be that we should all be watching for. Can Ncube's version survive independent evidence? That's the test. If the state finds major contradictions, Ncube's credibility could take a serious hit. But if his version survives cross-examination and the state cannot firmly connect the photographs, physical descriptions, firearm, etc., to an alleged association to the actual murder, then Mnisi may have achieved something very significant, not proving Ncube didn't do it, but creating a much more difficult proposition for the state. And you haven't proved that he did. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the nuclear battle that the state has, because after all of their chain of evidence, the courtroom is eventually comes back to one brutal question, simple question. Who put Ncube inside that house? And can the evidence prove it beyond reasonable doubt? That is where this trial gets really dangerous, okay? This is Noni M podcast. We are not just watching the evidence, we are following the chain. Now, what did you see when the evidence in chief was being led by Mnisi? I'll see you on our next video. Bye-bye.